My name is Crystal, and at 32 years old, I never expected to be a widow. Just a week ago, I stood beside the casket of my husband Thomas, watching as people filed past to pay their respects. 8 years of marriage gone in an instant. Through my tears, I noticed his sister Amanda acting strange, clutching her 7-year-old son Ethan's hand too tightly while whispering to her lawyer. When the final eulogy ended, she strode to the podium, unfolding a document with trembling hands. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit subscribe if you want to hear how I turned this nightmare into the greatest lesson about preparation and justice. Looking back, our story began like a fairy tale. I was 23 and building my career as a financial advisor at Meridian Wealth Management, one of the most prestigious firms in Boston. My clients trusted me with their futures, and I took pride in helping them secure financial stability. I was ambitious, driven, and completely focused on my career when Thomas walked into my life. We met at my college roommate Samantha's 4th of July barbecue 9 years ago. Thomas arrived with mutual friends, all 6 feet 2 inches of him with warm hazel eyes and an infectious laugh. He was 30, already established as a senior software engineer at a cutting-edge tech company, brilliant and accomplished, yet surprisingly humble. I remember the electric moment our eyes met across the crowded backyard. He was holding a plate of untouched food, listening intently to someone's story, but his gaze found mine and stayed there. By the end of the evening, we had talked for hours, discovering shared passions for hiking, classic films, and ambitious dreams. Our connection was immediate and undeniable. Thomas asked for my number before leaving, and by the next morning, I had a text inviting me to dinner. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Thomas was everything I had dreamed of finding in a partner. Intelligent, kind, supportive of my career, and genuinely interested in building a life together. 6 months in, during a weekend trip to Cape Cod, he proposed on the beach at sunset. I said yes without hesitation. We married 4 months later in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. With our combined incomes, we purchased a stunning colonial-style home in Brookline, valued at $900,000. It was more than I ever imagined owning at my age: 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen where Thomas loved to cook elaborate Sunday dinners, and a spacious backyard where we talked about our future children playing someday. The neighborhood was upscale, safe, with excellent schools and friendly neighbors who quickly became friends. Thomas came from a small family. He was an only child, and both his parents had passed away before we met. His father from a heart attack when Thomas was in college, and his mother from complications of pneumonia just a year before we met. The only family he had left was Amanda, technically his cousin, but raised alongside him after her parents divorced, and her mother, Thomas's aunt, took her in. They grew up as siblings, and Thomas always referred to her as his sister. From the moment Amanda and I met at our engagement party, I sensed her resentment. She offered congratulations with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. Throughout the wedding planning, she made passive-aggressive comments about the speed of our relationship, questioning if we really knew each other well enough. During our wedding reception, I overheard her telling another guest that she gave it 2 years tops. When I mentioned my concerns to Thomas, he dismissed them. "Amanda's just protective," he'd say. "She's been through a lot with her own failed marriage, and she's worried about me getting hurt. She'll warm up to you eventually." But she never did. Even as years passed and our marriage thrived, Amanda remained cold, distant, and occasionally hostile. She declined most of our invitations for holiday gatherings or family dinners, always with a ready excuse. The few times she did visit, the temperature in our warm home seemed to drop 10 degrees. Still, I tried for Thomas's sake. I sent birthday gifts, Christmas cards, and reached out regularly with invitations. Thomas appreciated my efforts and assured me that Amanda's attitude wasn't personal. I chose to believe him, focusing instead on our seemingly perfect life together. And it was perfect, at least on the surface. We traveled extensively: Paris for our first anniversary, a 2-week tour of Japan for our third, hiking the Inca Trail for our fifth. We hosted dinner parties where our friends commented on how in sync we were, finishing each other's sentences and sharing private jokes. Thomas supported my career advancement, celebrating each promotion with champagne and thoughtful gifts. I cheered him on as he rose through the ranks at his company, eventually becoming Chief Technology Officer. We talked about starting a family around our third anniversary, but Thomas always found reasons to wait. Let's take one more big trip first, or after this project at work is finished, or when the market stabilizes. I was patient, understanding that bringing children into our world was a momentous decision. But as my 30th birthday approached, I began to feel more urgency. Thomas promised we'd start trying after the new year, then after summer, then after his company's major product launch. The goalposts kept moving, and I couldn't understand why. There were other small things I noticed but dismissed. Occasional late-night phone calls that Thomas would take in his home office, closing the door. Text messages that made him smile in a way I couldn't quite read. Work meetings that ran unexpectedly late. But I trusted him completely. Thomas had never given me any concrete reason to doubt his faithfulness or honesty. Then, 16 months ago, everything changed. Thomas came home from a routine physical with devastating news. What he thought was persistent acid reflux was actually stomach cancer, already at stage 3. The prognosis was grim, 6 months to a year with aggressive treatment. Just like that, our perfect world shattered. The next 6 months were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, radiation treatments, and experimental procedures. I took leave from my job to become his full-time caregiver. We fought the disease with everything we had, consulting specialists across the country, trying alternative therapies alongside conventional medicine. Thomas faced his illness with remarkable courage, more concerned about my well-being than his own suffering. During this time, Amanda suddenly became a constant presence in our lives. She visited regularly, bringing Ethan along, offering to help with household tasks or sit with Thomas while I ran errands. At first, I was grateful for the support and thought perhaps this tragedy had finally softened her toward me. But something about her increased involvement felt off. Thomas and Amanda would fall silent when I entered a room. I'd catch long, meaningful glances between them during family dinners. Thomas began asking for privacy during some of Amanda's visits, requesting that I use the time to get out of the house and take care of myself. Again, it seemed reasonable on the surface, a dying man wanting private time with his sister, but my instincts whispered warnings I couldn't quite articulate. As Thomas grew weaker, I noticed something else that sent a chill through me. Ethan, Amanda's 7-year-old son, had Thomas's distinctive hazel eyes, the same cleft in his chin, the same way of tilting his head when concentrating. I had always thought he resembled his mother, but suddenly, the similarities to my husband seemed impossible to ignore. One afternoon, as Amanda was leaving with Ethan, the boy turned to Thomas and said, "Bye, Uncle Tommy. I finished that coding game you gave me." Thomas beamed with pride in a way that struck me as oddly paternal, saying, "That's my boy. You're a natural, just like your dad." Just like your dad. The words echoed in my mind long after they'd left. A suspicion began forming, one I desperately wanted to dismiss but couldn't. As I looked at a family photo on our mantle, Thomas at Ethan's 5th birthday party, their matching smiles side by side, I felt the foundation of my marriage crack beneath my feet. 2 months before Thomas passed away, my suspicions turned into something much more concrete. His condition had deteriorated to the point where he slept most of the day, heavily medicated for pain. During one of these periods, his phone lit up with a text from Amanda. Normally, I would never look at his private messages, but something compelled me to glance at the screen. "We need to talk about the arrangements for E. Time is running out. He deserves to know the truth." My hands shook as I read the words. Arrangements for E. Ethan. What truth did he deserve to know? That Thomas was actually his father. I carefully replaced the phone, my mind racing. I could confront Thomas immediately, demand answers while he was too weak to evade my questions. But what if I was wrong? What if I was misinterpreting an innocent message and caused unnecessary pain during his final months? Or worse, what if I was right? Did I really want Thomas's final days with me to be filled with accusations and anger? After a sleepless night, I made a decision. I would investigate quietly while continuing to care for Thomas with all the love and devotion I had promised in our vows. If there was a secret to uncover, I would find it without adding to his suffering. The next day, I contacted a private investigator named Marcus. He came recommended by a client of mine who had used his services during a difficult divorce. We met at a coffee shop 20 miles from our neighborhood, where I was unlikely to run into anyone we knew. "I need absolute discretion," I told Marcus after explaining my suspicions. "My husband is dying. I'm not looking to confront him or cause a scene. I just need to know the truth before he's gone." Marcus was professional and compassionate. "I understand completely, Mrs. Reynolds. I'll be thorough but invisible. You have my word." For the next several weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the devoted wife, administering medications, changing bedding, preparing the special protein shakes that were all Thomas could keep down, holding his hand through waves of pain, and reading aloud his favorite books when he was too tired to focus his eyes. At night, after he fell asleep, I would slip into the guest bedroom to take calls from Marcus or review the information he sent to a secure email address I had created. The emotional toll was immense. There were moments when Thomas would look at me with such love and gratitude that I felt like a monster for investigating him. Other times, when Amanda visited and they exchanged those loaded glances, my resolve strengthened. I was fighting for my dignity, for the truth I deserved after 8 years of marriage. 2 weeks into the investigation, Marcus sent me photos that made my stomach drop. Thomas, during a period 6 months before his diagnosis, when he was supposedly at a technology conference in Chicago, meeting Amanda in a park in Springfield, where she lived. The images showed them sitting close on a bench, Thomas handing her an envelope that she quickly tucked into her purse. In another series of photos, taken 3 months later, Thomas was at a playground with Amanda and Ethan, pushing the boy on a swing, his face alight with a joy I recognized from our early years together. Financial records show regular transfers from a separate account under your husband's name to Amanda Collins, Marcus wrote in his report. $5,000 every 3 months for the past 7 years, starting shortly before Ethan's birth. 7 years. Ethan was 7 years old. The timeline matched perfectly with our first year of marriage. While Thomas slept that night, I searched his home office more thoroughly than I ever had before. In the back of his desk drawer, beneath a stack of warranties and instruction manuals, I found a small key I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled, and it didn't match any lock in our house. The next day, while a home health nurse stayed with Thomas, I visited our bank. We had a joint safety deposit box there, which contained our passports, birth certificates, marriage license, and other important documents. But when I mentioned to the bank manager that I wanted to check if we had any other boxes, he confirmed my suspicion. "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds. There's a second box, registered solely to Thomas Reynolds. I can take you to it if you have the key." My heart pounded as I followed him to the vault. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into box number 714. Inside, I found a folder containing legal documents, a paternity test dated 6 years ago, confirming a 99.9% probability that Thomas was Ethan's biological father. There was also a separate financial account statement showing the trust he had established for Ethan, currently valued at just over $200,000. I closed the vault door behind me and sat on a private bench in the viewing room, allowing the tears to flow freely for the first time. All those years of believing we had the perfect marriage, all those conversations about starting our own family, someday, all the trust I had placed in this man, it felt like it was dissolving before my eyes. When I returned home, I maintained my composure until the nurse left. Then I locked myself in our bathroom, turned on the shower to mask the sound, and broke down completely. I sobbed until I had no tears left, until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen. Then I washed my face with cold water, applied concealer to hide the evidence of my breakdown, and returned to Thomas's bedside with a smile. That evening, I called my best friend Julia, the only person I felt I could confide in without judgment. "I need to see you." "It's urgent," I said, my voice still raspy from crying. We met at her apartment, while Thomas's mother's old friend Irene sat with him. Julia listened in shocked silence as I laid out everything I had discovered. "Oh, Crystal," she finally said, pulling me into a hug. "I am so sorry. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to confront him, to demand answers about why he's been lying to me our entire marriage. But he's dying, Jules. He might only have weeks left. Is this really how I want to spend our final time together? Julia thought for a moment before suggesting, "You should talk to a lawyer. Not to start divorce proceedings or anything like that, but to understand your position legally. If Thomas has been supporting this child financially, if there's a separate will or provisions you don't know about." She was right. The next day, I scheduled an appointment with Richard Wilson, a respected estate attorney recommended by another colleague. I told Thomas I was meeting with my financial advisor about restructuring some investments, and he was too weak to ask questions. Richard's office was warm and inviting, designed to put clients at ease during difficult conversations. After I explained my situation, he asked gentle but probing questions about our assets, Thomas's will, and what I knew about his arrangements for Amanda and Ethan. "Based on what you've told me, Mrs. Reynolds, there are several possibilities we need to prepare for," Richard explained. "If Thomas has created a secret will that includes provisions for his biological son, it could potentially impact your inheritance, especially regarding the house and other major assets." "But we bought the house together," I protested. "My name is on the deed." "That's good," Richard nodded. "As joint owners, you would retain your half regardless. But depending on how the ownership is structured and what provisions might be in a new will, there could be complications." He advised me to gather as much information as possible about Thomas's financial arrangements and any updated estate plans he might have made without my knowledge. "Hope for the best but prepare for the worst," he said kindly. "And consider recording any conversations with Thomas about his wishes or arrangements. Virginia is a one-party consent state for recordings, which means you can legally record conversations you're part of without informing the other participants." That night, I installed small surveillance cameras in our living room and Thomas's bedroom, areas where Amanda often visited. I told our regular nurses they were for security and to monitor Thomas when I stepped out. It wasn't a complete lie. I did want to keep Thomas safe, just not in the way they assumed. 3 days later, I got my opportunity. Amanda had visited earlier, and after she left, Thomas asked me to help him sit up in bed. "Amanda seems concerned about something," I said casually as I adjusted his pillows. "Is everything okay with Ethan?" Thomas was silent for a moment too long. "Why do you ask?" "Just a feeling I get. She seems anxious when she visits lately." He sighed, a sound that seemed to come from his very soul. "Crystal, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago." My heart raced, but I kept my face neutral. "You can tell me anything, Thomas. You know that." As the hidden camera recorded every word, Thomas began to speak, his voice weak but determined. What he said would change everything about how I approach the days to come. "I made a terrible mistake early in our marriage," Thomas began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Amanda and I. There was a night, just once, about a year after our wedding. You were away at that financial conference in New York. I remembered that weekend clearly, my first major professional conference, a significant step in my career. I had called Thomas every night, excited to share what I was learning, missing him terribly despite being gone only 3 days. Amanda was going through her divorce," he continued. "She came over, upset and drinking. I was lonely, missing you. We both made a horrible decision that I've regretted every day since." I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of calm, while inside I felt like I was shattering. "Go on," I managed to say. About 2 months later, she told me she was pregnant. She swore it had to be mine, because she and her ex-husband had been separated for months before that night. I was in shock, Crystal. We had just started talking about having our own family. I didn't know what to do. Thomas reached for a sip of water, his hand trembling. I held the glass for him, this man I had loved so completely, now a stranger revealing a life-altering betrayal. Amanda suggested we keep it between us. She didn't want child support or formal recognition. She just wanted financial help occasionally and for me to be part of Ethan's life as his uncle. It seemed like the best solution for everyone. You wouldn't be hurt. Ethan would have some connection to his father, and I could make amends without destroying our marriage. The irony was almost too much to bear. All those years I thought Thomas was simply a devoted uncle to Amanda's son. All those birthday parties and Christmas gifts, the special coding games and science kits he always chose with such care. He was parenting his secret child right in front of me. But as time passed, especially after my diagnosis, Amanda started to change. Thomas continued. She began suggesting that Ethan deserved to know the truth, that he deserved a larger share of my estate as my biological son. She's been pressuring me to change my will. "And did you?" I asked, amazed at how steady my voice remained. Thomas shook his head weakly. "No. I set up a trust fund for Ethan's education years ago. It's substantial, enough to see him through college and beyond. But I never changed my will. Everything still goes to you, Crystal. You're my wife, the love of my life despite my terrible mistake." His eyes filled with tears. "Amanda doesn't know this, but I think she's been planning something. Last week, when you were picking up my prescriptions, she brought papers for me to sign. She claimed they were forms for Ethan's trust, but I couldn't read the fine print with my vision so blurry from the medications. I signed where she indicated, but afterward I felt uneasy. I think she might try to claim I changed my will. I felt cold all over. Why would she do that? She's always been jealous of you, of what we have. And she's struggled financially since her divorce. The house alone would set her and Ethan up for life." Thomas gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I'm so sorry, Crystal. I've ruined everything." "You haven't ruined everything," I said automatically, the caregiver in me responding to his distress. "We'll figure this out. I need you to know how much I love you," he whispered. That night with Amanda was the biggest mistake of my life. She manipulated the situation, took advantage of my loneliness. But that doesn't excuse what I did. "Did you ever consider telling me?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since I first suspected the truth. "Every day for 7 years," he admitted. "But I was a coward. I was terrified of losing you." And as time passed, it seemed more and more impossible to confess. How do you tell the person you love most in the world that you betrayed them and have been lying about it for years? We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, the longest conversation we'd had since his condition had deteriorated. Thomas revealed everything, the guilt that had eaten at him, the manipulation Amanda had exerted, using Ethan as leverage to extract regular financial support beyond the trust fund. He expressed genuine remorse, not just for the affair, but for the years of deception that followed. I recorded every word, maintaining my composure throughout. Part of me, the part that had loved this man unreservedly for 8 years, wanted to forgive him completely in his final days. Another part, the one that had been living a lie for 7 years, wanted to rage and scream and walk away. But the pragmatic financial advisor in me, the woman who had built a career helping others protect their assets, knew I needed to focus on the practical implications of his confession. "Thomas," I said finally, "I need you to be absolutely clear. What are your wishes regarding the house and your other assets?" "Everything goes to you," he said firmly. "The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, it's all yours, Crystal. I've provided separately for Ethan through the trust. Amanda has no claim to anything else. And your official will reflect this." "Yes. It's with Martin Goldstein, my attorney." The office copy is in my desk, top right drawer, blue folder. His eyes held mine intently. Promise me you'll protect yourself, Crystal. Amanda won't accept this easily. 3 days later, Thomas slipped into a coma. The hospice nurse told me the end was near. I sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering all the things I wished we'd had time to resolve. My anger, my sense of betrayal, but also my appreciation for the good years we'd had together, the love that had been real despite his deception. Thomas died peacefully the following morning. Despite everything I had learned, I wept genuine tears for the man I had loved, for the future we would never have, for the children we had talked about but would never welcome into the world. The funeral arrangements consumed the next few days. I selected a mahogany casket I knew Thomas would have appreciated, chose his favorite navy suit for his burial clothes, and worked with the funeral director to create a service that honored his life. Throughout this process, Amanda maintained a cold distance, communicating only through terse texts about her and Ethan's participation in the service. 2 days before the funeral, I overheard Amanda on her phone in the funeral home parking lot as I arrived to finalize some details. She didn't see me approaching as she spoke urgently to someone. It's all arranged. I'll present the will after the eulogies, before the procession to the cemetery. Make sure you're there to handle any legal questions. Yes, I have the document with his signature. No, she has no idea what's coming. That evening, I called Richard Wilson and told him about Thomas's confession, the recording, and what I had overheard from Amanda. This is exactly what we prepared for, he said. I'll be at the funeral. Let her make the first move, then we'll respond appropriately. I want to handle this without creating more drama than necessary, I explained. Thomas may have betrayed me, but he deserves a dignified funeral. Of course, Richard agreed. But we also need to protect what's rightfully yours. Bring the recording and the official will. I'll take care of the rest. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that Thomas had always loved. I dressed in a simple black dress, applied minimal makeup, and drove to the funeral home an hour early to have a final private moment with my husband before others arrived. The service began at 11. The funeral home chapel filled with colleagues from Thomas's company, my coworkers, our friends, and neighbors. Amanda sat in the front row opposite me, Ethan beside her in a suit that looked uncomfortable on his small frame. Throughout the service, I felt her eyes on me, calculating and cold. After beautiful eulogies from Thomas's mentor and his best friend from college, the funeral director asked if anyone else wished to speak. That was when Amanda rose and walked deliberately to the podium, a folder clutched in her hand. Amanda stood at the podium, her black dress impeccably pressed, her face a mask of rehearsed grief. She adjusted the microphone and surveyed the room, her eyes lingering momentarily on me before addressing the gathered mourners. Thank you all for coming today to honor my brother Thomas, she began, her voice steady and clear. While many of you knew Thomas as a brilliant engineer, a loyal friend, and Crystal's husband, there's an important truth that needs to be acknowledged today. A murmur rippled through the attendees. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, aware of the curious glances darting my way. 7 years ago, Amanda continued, Thomas and I shared a connection that resulted in my son, Ethan. She gestured to the confused little boy in the front row who looked up at the mention of his name. Thomas is Ethan's biological father. The chapel fell silent, the kind of heavy, stunned silence that feels like a physical presence. Someone gasped audibly. I could feel dozens of eyes turn to me, waiting for my reaction, but I maintained my composed expression, giving away nothing. Thomas and I agreed to keep this private for various reasons, Amanda went on, gaining confidence from my apparent shock. But with his passing, the truth must come to light for Ethan's sake. My son deserves to be recognized as Thomas's child and heir. She opened the folder in her hands, removing a document with a flourish. I have here Thomas's most recent will, signed and notarized just 2 weeks ago. In it, he acknowledges Ethan as his son and designates that half of his estate, including the house valued at $900,000, be transferred to Ethan, with me as his legal guardian and trustee until he comes of age. She held up the document, waving it slightly as if to validate her claims. This reflects Thomas's true final wishes, his desire to provide for his only child. The funeral director looked desperately uncomfortable, clearly unprepared for this dramatic turn. Friends shifted awkwardly in their seats. Thomas's former assistant began to cry softly in the back row. "I realize this comes as a shock to many of you," Amanda said, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Especially to Crystal. But I ask for your understanding and respect for Thomas's decision to finally do right by his son." She turned to face me directly. "Crystal, I'm truly sorry you had to find out this way. Thomas wanted to tell you himself, but his illness progressed too quickly. I hope in time you'll come to accept Ethan as part of Thomas's legacy." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. She clearly expected me to crumble, to flee the chapel in tears and humiliation. Instead, I rose slowly from my seat, smoothed my dress, and walked with measured steps to the podium. Amanda reluctantly stepped aside, confusion flashing across her face at my composure. I took a moment to scan the room, making brief eye contact with Richard Wilson, who sat near the back, briefcase at his feet, a slight nod confirming he was ready. "Thank you, Amanda, for bringing this matter to everyone's attention," I began, my voice soft but carrying clearly through the silent chapel. "Yes, Ethan is indeed Thomas's biological son." Amanda's triumphant smile froze as I continued without a trace of surprise or distress. "I've known about Ethan's paternity for some time now," I revealed. "Thomas and I had many honest conversations during his final weeks. He shared with me his deepest regrets, including the brief affair with Amanda during our first year of marriage that resulted in Ethan's birth." I turned slightly to address the bewildered mourners. "Thomas made a mistake early in our marriage, a mistake he deeply regretted and one we worked through together privately before his passing." Amanda stepped forward. "If you knew, then you must understand why the house and assets." I held up a hand, silencing her. "What I understand, Amanda, is that Thomas was very clear about his wishes. He wanted to provide for Ethan's future, which he did through a separate trust fund established years ago, currently valued at over $200,000 dedicated to Ethan's education and well-being." Whispers spread through the chapel. Amanda's face flushed red. "As for the document you're holding," I continued calmly, "I find the timing interesting. Thomas's vision and cognitive abilities were significantly impaired by medication during his final weeks. He mentioned to me that you had brought him papers to sign, claiming they were related to Ethan's existing trust." I turned to Richard Wilson and nodded slightly. He stood and approached the podium with his briefcase. Amanda's eyes widened as she recognized him as a lawyer. "Amanda," I said, looking directly into her eyes, "did Thomas ever tell you about our last conversation?" The funeral home's sound system crackled to life as Richard connected my phone to the chapel's speakers. Thomas's weak but lucid voice filled the room, capturing every detail of his confession, the affair, Amanda's manipulation, his regret, and most importantly, his clear statement that he had already provided for Ethan separately and wanted everything else to go to me. Amanda's face drained of color as she listened. She tried to interrupt twice, but the funeral director gently prevented her from approaching the podium. When the recording ended, the room remained silent, the atmosphere heavy with collective shock. "As you can all hear," I said, my voice steady, "Thomas was very clear about his wishes. He acknowledged his responsibility to Ethan and fulfilled it through a trust established years ago. He also expressed concern that Amanda might try to claim he had changed his will during his final days when his judgment was impaired by medication." Richard Wilson stepped forward, opening his briefcase to remove a folder. "I have here Thomas Reynolds' official and legal last will and testament, filed with the Virginia Bar Association and last updated 14 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis. It clearly states that all assets, including the family home, are to be inherited by his wife, Crystal Reynolds." He handed the document to the funeral director, who looked relieved to have something procedural to focus on. "Additionally," Richard continued, addressing the attendees. "I have evidence suggesting that the document Mrs. Collins presented was created fraudulently." Amanda clutched her folder to her chest. "That's a lie. Thomas signed this willingly. He wanted Ethan to have what he deserves." Richard removed another document from his briefcase. "We've retained the services of Marcus Gentry, a licensed private investigator." He gestured toward a serious-looking man near the back of the chapel who stood briefly. "Mr. Gentry has compiled evidence demonstrating that Mrs. Collins has been attempting to manipulate Mr. Reynolds' estate for several months." The investigator approached and handed me a tablet. I turned it toward the mourners, showing photographs of Amanda meeting with an unknown man at a coffee shop, passing documents between them. "This is Jerome Phelps, a document specialist with a history of creating fraudulent legal papers. This meeting took place 3 weeks ago, while Thomas was heavily sedated at home." Murmurs grew louder as Amanda's scheme became clear. She stepped forward, desperation evident in her voice. "That's not what it looks like. I was just getting advice on how to present Thomas's wishes properly." "Mrs. Collins," Richard interjected, "handwriting analysis of the signature on your document indicates it was either forged or obtained when Mr. Reynolds was not in a condition to understand what he was signing. Furthermore, the notary stamp appears to be fraudulent, as the notary listed, Patricia Wilkins, has confirmed she did not witness this document signing." Several people gasped. Thomas's former business partner shook his head in visible disgust. Even the funeral director was looking at Amanda with undisguised disapproval. "I discovered the truth about Ethan several weeks ago," I explained to the stunned audience. "Initially through my own observations of the striking resemblance between them, then through investigating financial transactions, and finally finding paternity test results in a private safety deposit box." When confronted, Thomas confirmed everything and expressed genuine remorse. I turned to face Amanda directly. "He also warned me that you might try something like this. He told me how you've been pressuring him for years, using Ethan as leverage to extract more and more financial support beyond the generous trust he established." Amanda's composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what it's like raising his child alone while watching you two live in luxury. That house should be half Ethan's. He's Thomas's flesh and blood. Ethan is an innocent child who deserves support, which Thomas provided through the trust," I replied calmly. "But your attempt to manipulate a dying man and defraud his estate isn't about Ethan's welfare. It's about your resentment and greed." I addressed the gathering once more. "I've learned many painful truths in recent weeks. Yes, my husband betrayed me early in our marriage. Yes, he fathered a child with another woman. These revelations have been devastating. But Thomas faced his mistakes before he died. He took responsibility, made proper provisions for Ethan, and left this world with his affairs in order. I won't allow his final wishes to be distorted by Amanda's schemes." Richard stepped forward again. "Mrs. Collins, I should inform you that attempting to probate a fraudulent will is a criminal offense in the state of Virginia. However, Mrs. Reynolds has indicated she would prefer not to press charges, provided you withdraw your fraudulent claim immediately and agree to abide by the terms of the legitimate will and Ethan's existing trust." Amanda looked around wildly, perhaps hoping to find support among the mourners, but was met with averted gazes and uncomfortable silence. Even Ethan's babysitter, who had been watching him during this exchange, looked shocked and disapproving. "This isn't over," Amanda hissed, but her bravado was clearly faltering. "I have other evidence, other witnesses." "No, you don't," I interrupted gently. "Thomas told me everything, Amanda. Every manipulation, every threat, every demand for money beyond Ethan's trust." "It's over." Something in my tone must have finally reached her. Amanda's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, I glimpsed the desperation behind her actions. "What about Ethan?" she asked, her voice smaller. "He deserves to know his father." "Ethan will receive everything Thomas intended for him," I assured her. "The trust will provide for his education through graduate school if he chooses to attend. As for knowing his father," I paused, genuinely conflicted. That's a conversation for another day, in a more appropriate setting than his father's funeral. Amanda gathered her belongings, grabbed Ethan's hand, and hurried from the chapel without another word. The door closed behind them with a definitive click, leaving an awkward silence in their wake. The funeral director cleared his throat. Perhaps we should proceed with the final prayers before accompanying Mr. Reynolds to his resting place. As we moved through the remaining funeral rituals, I felt a strange mixture of grief, vindication, and exhaustion. Friends approached tentatively during the procession to the cemetery, offering condolences that now carried an additional layer of sympathy for the public humiliation Amanda had attempted to inflict. "I had no idea you were going through all this," my colleague Jennifer whispered as we stood by the graveside. "You've handled it with incredible dignity." I thanked her quietly, watching as Thomas's casket was lowered into the ground. Despite everything, tears streamed down my face. I was mourning not just the man I had married, but the marriage I thought we had, the trust I believed was unshakable, the future we had planned together. As the service concluded and mourners began to disperse, Richard approached me. "You did well in there," he said. "Not many people could have maintained such composure." "I had time to prepare," I replied. Amanda didn't realize I already knew everything. "What will you do about Ethan going forward?" he asked. I gazed at the fresh mound of earth that now covered my husband. "Honor Thomas's wishes. Make sure Ethan receives the support Thomas intended for him." Beyond that, I sighed. I honestly don't know yet. As we walked back toward the parking lot, I noticed Amanda sitting in her car, Ethan beside her in the backseat. Our eyes met briefly through the windshield. For a moment, I thought she might approach me again, but instead, she started her car and drove away, leaving behind the chaos she had tried to create and the man who had fathered her child. The days following the funeral passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and uncomfortable conversations. News of Amanda's dramatic announcement and my countering evidence spread quickly through our social circle. Friends called with awkward condolences, unsure whether to address the scandal or pretend it hadn't happened. Colleagues sent flowers with cards expressing admiration for my strength and grace under pressure. The funeral home director even called to apologize for not preventing the confrontation, though I assured him no one could have anticipated Amanda's actions. Richard Wilson guided me through the probate process with efficiency and compassion. As expected, Amanda filed a formal challenge to Thomas's will, claiming the recording was edited and the document she had presented was legitimate. The judge assigned to the case reviewed all evidence, including the unedited recording, the fraudulent will Amanda had presented, and affidavits from Thomas's doctors confirming his cognitive state during his final weeks. 3 weeks after the funeral, we received the court's decision. The judge dismissed Amanda's claims entirely, citing clear evidence of attempted fraud and upholding Thomas's official will. Additionally, the judge ordered an independent trustee to oversee Ethan's educational trust, removing Amanda's access to the funds except for legitimate educational expenses. "She's lucky criminal charges weren't filed," Richard commented when he delivered the news. The judge was quite disturbed by the evidence of forgery. "I never wanted this to become a criminal matter," I explained. "Ethan has been through enough without having his mother facing legal troubles." Despite the court's definitive ruling, I still had to decide how to handle my relationship with Ethan going forward. He was, after all, my late husband's biological child, an innocent party in his parents' deception. After several sessions with a grief counselor who specialized in complex family situations, I reached out to Amanda. "I'd like to meet with Ethan," I said when she answered my call, her hello frigid with lingering resentment. Not to discuss the past or make things complicated, but simply to establish some kind of relationship. He deserves to know about his father from someone who loved him. Amanda was silent for so long, I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she replied, "Ethan's been asking questions since the funeral. I don't know what to tell him." "Then perhaps we can figure that out together," I suggested. For his sake. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a a park halfway between our homes with a playground where Ethan could play while we talked. When they arrived, I was struck again by how much the boy resembled Thomas. The same thoughtful gaze, the same way of tilting his head when considering something new. "Ethan," Amanda said stiffly, "this is Mrs. Reynolds. She was married to your Uncle Thomas." "Hi," he said shyly, looking up at me with Thomas's hazel eyes. "Mom says Uncle Thomas went to heaven." I knelt to his level. "That's right. And he asked me to make sure you know how special you were to him." We spent an hour at the park, Amanda watching guardedly as I pushed Ethan on the swings and listened to him talk about the coding game Thomas had given him. "Uncle Thomas said I'm smart like him," Ethan told me proudly. "He said maybe I'll make computers too someday." "I think you probably will," I replied, seeing Thomas's intelligence shining in the boy's animated explanations. Before they left, I gave Amanda a USB drive. "These are photos and videos of Thomas from our years together. Holidays, vacations, everyday moments. There's nothing inappropriate or confusing for Ethan, just memories you might want to share with him someday when he's ready to know more about his father." Amanda took it wordlessly, but I saw gratitude flicker briefly across her face before her guard went back up. We established boundaries that day. I would send birthday and Christmas gifts, receive occasional updates about Ethan's progress in school, and perhaps meet a few times a year. It wasn't the relationship Thomas should have established himself, but it was something I could live with. Back home, I faced the daunting task of sorting through Thomas's belongings. Each item carried memories, some now tainted by the knowledge of his deception. His clothes still hung in our closet, his favorite coffee mug sat on his desk, his reading glasses rested on his nightstand beside a half-finished novel. Every object posed the same question: keep, donate, or discard? I decided to approach the task room by room, starting with his home office. Among his papers, I found a folder labeled simply, "Letters." Inside were a dozen sealed envelopes, each addressed to me in Thomas's distinctive handwriting, dated at monthly intervals starting from his diagnosis. With trembling hands, I opened the first one. "My dearest Crystal," it began. "If you're reading this, I've finally found the courage to tell you the truth about Ethan, or I've passed away without ever telling you, and you've discovered it yourself. Either way, I owe you an explanation that goes beyond the inadequate words, 'I'm sorry.'" The letter detailed the night of the affair, his immediate regret, and the panic he felt when Amanda announced her pregnancy. He described the agonizing decision to keep the truth from me, believing it would only cause pain to everyone involved, especially me. He acknowledged the selfishness of his choice, driven by fear of losing me and shame over his actions. "Each year that passed made it harder to tell the truth," he wrote. "How do you confess a lie that has grown for years? I told myself I was protecting you, but in reality, I was protecting myself from losing your love and respect. What began as one terrible mistake became years of deception that I will regret for the rest of my days." I read all 12 letters that night, tracking Thomas's journey from guilt and self-justification to genuine remorse and acceptance of responsibility. The final letter, dated just weeks before his death, revealed his suspicion that I had discovered the truth, but was sparing him a confrontation in his final days. "Your kindness in this, if my suspicion is correct, is more than I deserve," he wrote. "Know that I have loved you completely, even while failing you so profoundly. The happiness we shared was real. My dishonesty about Ethan doesn't negate the truth of my love for you, though I understand if you cannot reconcile these contradictions after I'm gone." The letters offered some comfort, evidence that Thomas had grappled with his conscience, that he had wanted to make amends but lacked the courage until it was too late. They didn't erase the betrayal, but they helped me understand it better. My grief counselor, Dr. Alina Montrose, helped me process these complex emotions during our weekly sessions. "You're mourning multiple losses," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "The loss of your husband, the loss of the marriage you thought you had, the loss of a future you had planned together, and the loss of complete trust. It's natural to feel overwhelmed. Sometimes I'm so angry I can hardly breathe," I admitted. "Other times, I miss him so much it physically hurts. How can I feel both things at once? Because grief isn't linear, and complicated grief even less so, she replied. You can love the man and hate what he did. You can miss him terribly while being furious at his betrayal. All of these feelings are valid. As weeks became months, I developed a routine that helped me cope. I returned to work, finding comfort in the familiar challenges of helping clients secure their financial futures. I joined a support group for young widows, though I was selective about how much of my story I shared. I began renovating our home now, painting walls in colors Thomas had vetoed, replacing furniture that held too many memories, creating a space that reflected this new chapter of my life. Friends worried about me staying in the house. Doesn't it hold too many painful memories? My friend Julia asked over coffee one Saturday. Some days, yes, I acknowledged. But this house represents my financial security and independence. Amanda tried to take it from me. Leaving would feel like another loss I'm not willing to accept. Besides, I had practical reasons for staying. The housing market was strong, the mortgage was nearly paid off, and the neighborhood provided the stability I desperately needed while rebuilding my life. I transformed Thomas's home office into a yoga and meditation room, painted our bedroom a soothing sage green, and planted a garden in the backyard, physical manifestations of my healing process. Through it all, I kept my word regarding Ethan. I established a cordial, distant relationship with Amanda, focused entirely on Ethan's well-being. For his 8th birthday, I sent a telescope Thomas had mentioned wanting to give him. On Christmas, educational games and books Thomas would have chosen. Each gift came with a card signed, "From someone who cared very much about your Uncle Thomas." Amanda gradually softened her hostility, perhaps recognizing that my interest in Ethan was genuine and not motivated by any desire to disrupt their lives. When Ethan won a regional science fair with a computer project inspired by one of Thomas's gifts, she texted me a photo of him with his ribbon, a small but significant olive branch. As the first anniversary of Thomas's death approached, I felt both dread and a sense of impending closure. The year had been a crucible, burning away illusions and leaving behind painful but valuable truths. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, wisdom born of suffering, and the capacity to forge ahead despite profound betrayal. The night before the anniversary, I sat in my renovated living room, looking through our wedding album for the first time since Thomas's death. The smiling couple in those photos seemed like strangers now, so young, so naively certain of their happily ever after. Yet despite everything that had happened, I couldn't bring myself to regret loving Thomas. Our marriage had brought me joy alongside the pain, growth alongside the disillusionment. We were real, I whispered to his image, tracing his smile with my fingertip. What we had was real, even with the lies. And I'm still here, still standing, still moving forward. I closed the album and placed it on a high shelf in my closet, not discarded, but no longer central to my daily life. It was time to turn the page and begin the next chapter of my story, one entirely my own. 1 year after Thomas's death, I stood in my kitchen on a bright spring morning, sipping coffee from a new mug and reviewing my plans for the day. The house around me had been transformed, walls repainted in warm, vibrant colors, new furniture arranged to my preferences, photographs carefully curated to preserve happy memories while acknowledging the complex reality of my marriage. My journey through grief, betrayal, and rebuilding had been neither linear nor easy. Some days still brought waves of anger, so intense I had to pull my car over and breathe through them. Other days carried a wistful sadness for the future Thomas, and I had planned but would never experience. Yet increasingly, I found myself focused on the present and the future rather than the painful past. The trust fund Thomas had established for Ethan remained intact, with the court-appointed trustee providing regular updates on its management. Amanda and I had reached an uneasy truce, communicating primarily through email about Ethan's educational needs and occasional visits. To my surprise, we had gradually developed a functional co-trustee relationship, setting aside our personal history to focus on what Thomas would have wanted for his son. Ethan had just turned 8, showing more of Thomas's traits with each passing month: his analytical mind, his intuitive understanding of technology, even his distinctive laugh. During our quarterly visits, I shared age-appropriate stories about Thomas, focusing on his kindness, intelligence, and the positive impact he had on others. Whether Amanda would ever tell Ethan the full truth about his parentage remained her decision, but I had made peace with whatever choice she made. My professional life had taken an unexpected turn following the public drama at Thomas's funeral. Word had spread through client referrals about how I had protected my assets while handling a difficult situation with dignity. Several newly divorced or widowed women sought me out specifically, looking for financial advice from someone who understood the emotional complexities of their situations. Recognizing an opportunity to help others while processing my own experience, I developed a specialty within my practice: financial planning for women in transition. I created workshops on protecting assets during divorce, managing inheritances, and building financial independence after major life changes. The work was deeply satisfying, transforming my personal tragedy into a way to empower others. Your story helped me find the courage to look at our joint accounts, a new client told me during our second meeting. I discovered my husband had been hiding money for years. Without your workshop, I might never have known until it was too late. The grief support group I had joined introduced me to women whose experiences mirrored aspects of my own. There was Linda, whose husband of 30 years had died, leaving behind evidence of a second family in another state. Maria, whose seemingly perfect marriage ended when her husband died suddenly of a heart attack, revealing massive gambling debts that nearly cost her their home. Stephanie, whose late husband's business partner tried to claim ownership of assets rightfully hers. Through sharing our stories, we formed bonds stronger than mere friendship, a sisterhood forged in the fire of betrayal and loss. We celebrated each other's small victories. Linda finalizing the sale of her husband's secret vacation property and using the proceeds to fund her dream of opening a bookstore. Maria qualifying for a mortgage on a smaller home entirely in her name. Stephanie winning her legal battle and securing her financial future. My own healing process continued through therapy, meditation, and deliberate choices about how to move forward. Dr. Montrose had helped me recognize that forgiveness wasn't a single decision, but a daily practice, not for Thomas's benefit, but for my own peace of mind. Forgiveness doesn't mean what happened was okay, she reminded me during one session. It means you're choosing not to let the anger consume your life. Gradually, I found myself able to forgive Thomas for his betrayal, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because carrying the weight of resentment was exhausting. More surprisingly, I began to feel compassion for Amanda, whose desperation had driven her to risk criminal charges in her misguided attempt to secure Ethan's future. 6 months after the funeral, I had made the difficult decision to travel alone to Japan, a trip Thomas and I had been planning before his diagnosis. Friends thought I was crazy to revisit a dream we had shared, but I needed to reclaim these aspirations as my own. Standing alone at the summit of Mount Fuji, watching the sunrise paint the sky in breathtaking colors, I felt Thomas's absence acutely, but also experienced a profound sense of my own resilience. That trip became the first of many solo adventures. I visited the ancient ruins of Machu Picchu, explored the bustling markets of Marrakesh, and hiked the rugged coastline of New Zealand. Places Thomas and I had marked on our world map with colorful pins, destinations now experienced through my eyes alone. Travel taught me that independence wasn't something to fear, but to embrace. Each new stamp in my passport represented another step in rebuilding my identity separate from my role as Thomas's wife. I was no longer defined primarily as a widow or a betrayed spouse, but as a woman charting her own course through life. The renovation of our house, my house, was finally complete, the last physical vestige of transformation. The home office where Thomas had made secret calls to Amanda was now my sunlit yoga studio. The bedroom where he had spent his final days was completely redesigned, peaceful and free from painful associations. The backyard, where we had once planned to install a playground for the children, We never had now featured a meditation garden and a small koi pond. As I prepared for a quiet dinner with friends on the anniversary of Thomas's death, I reflected on the profound lessons of the past year. I had learned that life rarely follows the path we envision, that people we love are capable of both extraordinary kindness and devastating betrayal, and that the greatest security comes not from others but from within ourselves. I had discovered that preparation and knowledge are powerful shields against life's storms. My financial expertise had protected me when Amanda tried to claim what wasn't hers. My decision to investigate privately rather than confront Thomas immediately had given me time to gather evidence and consider my options. My professional training had provided both financial security and a framework for rebuilding after loss. Perhaps most importantly, I had learned that resilience isn't about avoiding pain, but about moving through it with purpose and dignity. The woman who stood in Thomas's funeral home facing Amanda's accusations was stronger than I had known myself to be. That strength hadn't appeared from nowhere. It had been within me all along, waiting for circumstances that required its emergence. As my friends arrived for dinner, bringing dishes and wine and warm embraces, I felt genuinely grateful for the community that had supported me through the darkest days. We raised our glasses in a toast, not to Thomas or to the past, but to resilience, to new beginnings, and to the wisdom that comes only through weathering life's most difficult storms. Later that evening, after my friends had gone home, I sat alone in my garden beside the softly bubbling koi pond. A full moon illuminated the new growth of spring, symbols of renewal surrounding me in the space I had created from the ashes of betrayal and loss. Sometimes the most painful betrayals lead to the most profound strength, I whispered to the night air. I learned that being prepared isn't about expecting the worst from people, but about being ready to handle whatever life throws at you with dignity and grace. I thought of Ethan, carrying Thomas's legacy through his innocent enthusiasm for coding and science. I thought of my clients, finding their financial footing after their own life upheavals. I thought of the woman I had become, scarred but stronger, wiser but still open to life's possibilities. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, but it was mine to choose. And for the first time since Thomas's death, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future stretching before me, undefined and full of potential. What about you? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal or loss? What helped you find strength when you needed it most? Drop a comment below to share your story. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and transformation. And remember, sometimes our greatest strength emerges from our deepest wounds. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to face whatever challenges come your way.